TheDurad.locals.com. Everybody look for us there. And Alexandra, let's segue now towards China. We mentioned it in the beginning of the video that we're going to talk a little bit about China and the U.S. because you did mention energy and trade. You mentioned that Russia may be in a position to now start supplying the United States with natural gas and oil and energy. And what a change that is from just 2, 3 years ago when Trump was president and the U.S. seemed like it was pretty much energy independent. It was energy independent and self-sufficient. And Trump was even talking about getting gas and oil to the Europeans. Well, it's completely flipped now in just 6, 7, 8 months. Go figure. I wonder what happened 6, 7, 8 months ago that has caused this flip to happen. But it's not only Russia; it is China as well. We get all the negative news about China coming out of the United States. We get all the rhetoric that the U.S. and China are going to go to war. But the reality of the situation is not only is Russia in a position to start selling the United States goods and services, but the Chinese are already selling the United States a boatload, a ton of goods and services. As a matter of fact, Alexander, you have the numbers. It's record breaking.
It's absolutely record-breaking. It is quite astonishing. Let's talk about natural gas and oil. We don't yet know the exact figures for this, but you're absolutely right. Just a few years ago, and by the way, Trump has just made a comments about this, the United States was energy self-sufficient. It was actually becoming an energy exporter. That position over the last couple of months, last year, has collapsed utterly. And, it's difficult to understand exactly why, but some things undoubtedly have played a part. There was the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline. And, of course, there's been the moves that the administration has made, very much under the pressure of the progressive AOC wing of the Democratic Party, to basically clamp down on the shale oil producers. And the result is that even though energy prices are surging, the energy producers, the shale producers, are not so willing any longer to invest in shale plays. And the result is that energy output is declining in the United States, or is remaining stagnant. The United States now faces surging prices in the energy markets, and it is having to buy oil from Russia because that's where it must go in order to make up the differences in the oil plays within the United States itself. And there is now some talk, which I've seen in a few trade journals, that before very long we're going to see the United States importing liquefied natural gas from the Russian Arctic fields. Now that is astonishing when you consider that just a year ago, 10 months ago, it was the United States that was offering Europe liquefied natural gas as an alternative to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. So, this is completely reversed. But the China figures, the China trade figures, are even more remarkable because if you remember, Donald Trump comes in, he is very unhappy about the imbalances in trade relations between the United States and China. He starts to import tariffs on Chinese goods. And as a result, whereas the China-US trade was around $700 billion a year, it peaked in 2018. In 2019, it crashed. It went down very far. Well, this year, we learned that the trade balance, the trade between China and the US has surged by 35.4%. It's reached $543 billion in the first 9 months of this year. And it is expected, the Chinese are saying that they expect the China-US trade to break all records this year. So we went from 2018, we went down under Trump in 2019, and we're shooting up again, and shooting up again at an extraordinary rate. Now, I should say there's been an upward blip in US exports to China that might be, I suspect probably is related to higher prices for US food products. The Chinese still buy lots of soybeans, for example, from the United States. But I suspect that has more to do with the upward tick in commodity prices. The more important figure to look at is the Chinese exports to the United States have risen this year by 39%. So it's 33%. I'm sorry, 33%. So they've risen by a third. They're just surging, and in fact, the United States is sucking in more goods that China is able to produce. We hear all these stories about how there's not enough room in ports in the United States to offload all the goods that are coming in from China, because the US industrial sector is still very troubled. And at the same time, with all this massive spending the administration has been undertaking, the demand for Chinese goods is at the moment insatiable, and even China is struggling to satisfy it. So it's extraordinary to see the United States talks tough against Russia, but it's driven to importing Russian oil, before very long, Russian natural gas. The US talks tough against China. China trade is surging to record-breaking levels. The US talks about sanctions against each of these two countries, and of course the relative reserves of both countries are surging. Russia's financial reserves are now higher than they have ever been in Russian and indeed Soviet history. They're well over $620 billion and rising fast. So it's remarkable to see what a huge change the Biden-Harris administration has made.
Yeah, but what does this tell you on a couple of levels? But first, let's start with the U.S. What does this tell you about the U.S. situation right now, the domestic situation, the economy? You have inflation. It's real. There is inflation, and it is very real. You have supply shortages. The supply chain seems to be breaking down. Like you said, the ports are backed up. But at the same time, you have all of these Chinese goods just continuing to flow into the country, but you can't get them to people. I mean, I've heard shortages at grocery stores of various items and goods. I've heard items for homes, for furniture, all of these things are in short supply, and they're all just kind of stuck in this bottleneck at the ports. But the U.S. is still bringing in more Chinese products. What is this telling you about what's happening in the U.S. right now? This is just complete mismanagement?
Yes, I mean, it is complete mismanagement. I mean, even if you assume, as by the way I do, I mean, I've always believed that within the administration there is always a group, very powerful group, that actually is not happy about this breakdown in relations with China, actually has always wanted to see relations with China get back on an even keel. They would love to return to the Trump situation. They're not really worked up over Taiwan. There's some people in the State Department and the National Security Council and the Pentagon who are, but you'll find a lot of other people who are actually want to see economic trade and economic relations with China go back to the pre-Trump era, and who are prepared to look the other way even as Chinese goods surge in. So I've always felt that. But putting all that to one side, the fact that we're having all these supply chain breakdowns, the fact that goods are pouring in, Chinese goods from China on an enormous scale, the United States is, as I said, having to import energy, where just a short while ago it was an energy self-sufficient. What it shows is, again, the utter folly and absurdity of the administration's economic policies. They are not based on proper economic decision making. They sacrifice long-term interests, the long-term interests of the United States in economic terms, to the immediate political needs of the moment. We've had this massive overspending in the United States. It's created an enormous inflation, enormous demand for goods. The US domestic economy is struggling to satisfy them. The US communication system is struggling to satisfy them. We see supply chain breakdowns. We see breakdowns at almost every level.
What does this tell you from a geopolitical standpoint, Alexander? I mean, you imagine if such trade is ramping up, then, I mean, war doesn't seem very possible, or does it not signal that at all? I mean, is one not related to the other?
I think it is intimately related to another. Let's take the situation with China. Now, there's been lots of talk recently about China attacking Taiwan and about the United States taking action against China if China does attack Taiwan. But look at this. The United States, as we speak at this moment in time, its economy is depending on vast mountains of Chinese goods to make up the difference, to keep the whole economy in the United States operating at some level, to satisfy needs there. If there's a Chinese attack on Taiwan and that trade stops, we're talking about trade that's going to be more than $700 billion by the end of this year. More than $700 billion. If you sort of just take that out of the equation, that is going to precipitate a huge economic crisis in the United States. Does the administration want to see that? Does the political class in Washington want to see that? Does the business community want to see that? I can't believe that. I mean, the economic chaos that would cause within the United States, the economic problems that would cause within the United States are enormous. So all this brave talk about standing up to China over Taiwan, I think is completely unrealistic. I don't think it's achievable because the economic numbers tell you something different. They suggest, they make it, in fact, crystal clear that far from the United States being able to stand up to China over Taiwan, the Chinese have the United States in effect over a barrel. Because if there's a war there there's a war over Taiwan, the United States faces an economic crisis. And I don't think this administration wants that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. The administration seems so utterly confused and just all over the place on everything. It seems domestic, foreign policy, dealing with China. It doesn't have any consistency whatsoever in its policy. Or maybe we are just seeing, once again, real quick to finish the video, maybe we are seeing, Alexander, theater. I mean, this administration is all theater. As a matter of fact, whether it's Biden or Kamala Harris, it's all optics and theater. So maybe the entire, rhetoric is once again just theater as they just crank up the imports from China. Maybe distraction.
I think very likely it is theatre, but of course theatre that is very damaging because of course Taiwan, for example, there are people in Taiwan who are taking all this theatre seriously. The Taiwanese president has been making some very strong comments, standing up and defying China in the belief that she has the United States at her back. So that might create a crisis in Taiwan because the Chinese have said, look, if Taiwan makes any move towards secession, we're going to act against it. But, that's what she's been encouraged to do. That's what all this rhetoric pouring out of Washington suggests and implies. But of course, if the reality is that in the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the United States is not going to be able to do all the things that it's threatened to do, because to do so would precipitate an existential economic crisis in the United States itself, then she is being led up the garden path. And so are other people in Taiwan. They could find that in a crisis, far from having the United States at their back, as they believe, the United States is nowhere to be seen. A wise administration confronted with this sort of thing tries to damp things down, tries to explain to the Taiwanese, look, we're not in a position to do this at the moment. We can help you up to a point. We can strengthen your defense capacity. We will help you build as we can. But at this moment in time, our situation, our economic situation is such that it's very difficult for us to help you take the kind of steps that you seem to be minded to take. And a wise administration looks at the economy, looks at the overall state of the economy, as it was at the start of the year. It sees that it's growing steadily. It says, right, we're going to let that steady pace of economic growth continue. We're not going to put our foot down on the accelerator, try to surge growth rates to 8, 9, whatever it was percent that they were talking about at one point, because we realize that if we do that, we will be pushing the economy faster than it can realistically grow. That will only create shortages, supply chain bottlenecks, and bigger dependence on China and even Russia. That's what a joined up administration does. An administration that listens to the experts, that consults widely, that takes a sense of the pulse of the US economy, and that looks at the international situation and weighs up its options and does so carefully and well. Well, that's not what happened, that's not what it did, and that's why we are in the situation that we are in now.
All right, we'll end it there. TheDuran.locals.com. Look for us there. Please join the community at TheDuran.locals.com. We have all kinds of great exclusive content in that community. You'll find the link down below, and go to the Duran Shop, 10% off when you use the code REALNEWS. You'll find the link for that code down below as well. And go to Odyssey, BitChute, Rumble, and SuperU, where we post all of our videos on those new media platforms. You'll find those links as well underneath this video. Take care.